Hi there everyone, Jill Mathis here doing another portfolio review for Photography Concentrate. I had the pleasure to review an interesting body of work by Yōko Kimura from Australia. I enjoy doing these reviews because besides being just plain curious what everyone is doing, I'm always amazed at how, with some people's work anyway, you can really zoom in on what they're focused on and on what makes them tick. Yōko's work was one of those moments where I felt I got to know the real photographer just by seeing a small amount of work, 69 images in total. I asked Yōko to give me some ideas of what she wanted to do, where she was heading with her photography, and what was her main interest. Because of the high level of work, I thought that these images deserved a better platform than just Instagram, and in fact, Yōko confirmed that a website is in her plans. Besides her interest in street, architectural, and industrial photography, as well as humanistic, social, and environmental issues, she wrote to me saying, "I'd like to work professionally, but find it difficult to know how to market myself as I want to go in a more artistic direction." She actually ended the conversation with saying that her work was all over the place. And this is actually where I disagree. To me, it is very clear that her interest, and as is so often the case, her real strength is the human figure. Even in photos on environmental and social issues, such as these in the textile redistribution warehouse, mainly show people. I believe that this is her way of putting a recognizable face on a problem lacking a relatable human figure. Unlike, say, Black Lives Matter or trafficking or drugs, all of which have many types of faces we can relate to. But it is also simply her own unique voice or style coming front and center. In another small group of images, this time at a vintage festival, you can see this curiosity and need to see and capture the human form. You would think that at a vintage festival, one would photograph, well, you know, all the lovely old vintage items. But instead, Yōko seems to be far more interested in the form of the human figure. Whether it's in this old guy here, or Wile E. Coyote, or the hula dancers on the dashboard. I noticed another thing right away, and it was Yōko's tendency to come in tight and control the background, either by eliminating the background altogether, as in the gymnast photos, or creating a minimalist background such as these and these amazing images in the water. She also controls the surroundings by bringing the subject up close, as in these of the German sculptor. Here too, her love of the human figure comes out even in this choice of subject. A figurative sculptor who both paints and sculpts in the same theme. It's obvious she seeks out people and is curious about putting them or finding them in unusual spaces or situations. Yōko's voice and style are so strong that this came out on my first perusal through her Instagram page. My goal with Yōko's work is not to really critique the individual photos, but to sort of streamline these images a bit, gearing up for creating a Behance project page or even a website. I like Behance more than Instagram since it is geared to more serious work and has less of a social media feel to it. It's also a really great way to test the waters before committing to the cost and maintenance of a full-blown website. So my first suggestion to Yōko is to actually commit to a label or define herself professionally. I feel it is very important for clients to have a handle on what kind of photographer they have in front of them. Now, your interest may be vast, but that is something that you don't particularly want to communicate to a client right in the beginning, since it doesn't necessarily instill confidence in the beginning of a client-photographer relationship. Compare it a little bit like going to the doctor. I think in theory, we are all a little bit more confident when we go to a specialist than, say, a general practitioner. Looking through her Instagram, I see some of Yōko's hashtags are profile photographer and environmental portraits. I think one of those are encompassing enough for a label, leaving enough wiggle room to have a fairly wide range of images. Or you could combine the two by saying profile and environmental portrait photography. Now, Yōko is a really good writer, a very important trait for all photographers. And so the first step after creating the label would be to create a short paragraph around that label. With a site in mind for clients, my next suggestion would be to try and get each series to at least 9 images, with the majority of each group being actual portraits. For example, of the series here on Yōko's Instagram page, the promo shoot she did for the fire performers is a really super mix. There are 6 images with the performers who you can see really clearly, and 3 images that are without performers. These 3 images without the performers add a variety and substance to the group and really help to keep the interest while also showing what the performers actually do. I would use this series as a template to follow when putting the work online. Another example of a really good series is the one with the German sculptor, though I would actually have liked to have seen a couple of other types of photos to add context and depth to this group. Maybe a photo of a sculpture or a drawing, or even a photo of the usual paraphernalia that you find in artist studios. An interesting contextual image would be a good replacement for the one photo that I find somewhat superfluous, which is the photo, the portrait with the shadow lines. So let's begin having a look at Yōko's entire Instagram collection. We're going to have a look at all the photographs, concentrating on the series and the photographs that are going to have the most impact and have the most potential to create a really solid website for Yōko. From Yōko's text related to these photos, it's clear she's experimenting both with the idea and the use of black and white over color. Now, for me, these are just gorgeous images, and I actually prefer the black and white. The black and white are just that one step away from reality, which is needed to really appreciate those amazing soft lines formed from the blurring in the water. For a professional site, I believe it's important that the photographer appears decisive, and showing both versions, both the black and white and the color, does not send a strong message. So here, a choice needs to be made. In the end, though, I would hesitate putting these on a dedicated site, since no matter how strong these images are, 3 photos does not a series make. So until there are more, even though I just love these images, I would keep these off a website. I find the photos in the textile redistribution warehouse to be exceptional. There's an easiness, almost a playfulness to the images, which helps the viewer swallow the bitter pill of the actual issue. And in reading the text, Yōko wrote, "It is clear that was exactly her intention." We need to see more photos, though, in this series, but there's the beginning of a really good mix. The guy laying on the huge heap of clothes, the 2 women sort of drowning in textiles, and the guy holding the basket, which is one of my favorites. I like the fact that Yōko didn't just repeat these settings and shoot everyone in the same position. I really appreciate the work put in the mountain made of clothes and its well-executed images that sort of veer off the track, mixed in with the portraits that can cement Yōko's standing as a well-rounded photographer. Of these 2 images, I would probably eliminate the original mountain photo since it seems a bit redundant here. We've already touched on these images of the fire performers, which is a good, solid group. In this case, the use of the open shutter, which is kind of a little trick that can get overused sometimes, is both necessary and well done. And again, I'd say this was the minimum of images that should be in each group or series. I would have really liked to see more photos from this nonviolent protest in Berlin. These 3 photos are a great example of good, solid reportage, but unfortunately they leave the viewer sort of hanging since there are so few. I'm willing to bet, though, that there are more from that day that could round out this series, making it a really good entry to show Yōko's documentary talents. The next two series have the same scarcity issue. The three from the American listening station above Berlin are first-rate photos with a great range. I went back a number of times just for my own pleasure, but in the end, I think that unless there's a way to mix these in with other series on memories or favorite places, they just don't fit in with a professional site on portraits. The same can be said of the still lives. For me, this is where a personal page on Instagram actually works great. You can throw out these random images without really needing to fit them in any one place. On this hypothetical website or Behance page that we've been talking about, I could also see a separate page for more traditional portraits that don't necessarily fall under environmental, profile, or reportage portraits. This is where I'd put images such as in this series. Now, on a page dedicated to portraits in general, I'd go ahead and mix up the photos from a range of people, making sure that the flow between the photos was harmonious. On a general portrait page, you could obviously keep all the photos of the same person together, but with careful consideration, it works well and keeps the interest of the viewer high if there's a smooth, flowing mix. I also would be careful to keep each of the poses unique from each other. For example, in the group we see here, I might consider eliminating one of the black and white photos of the girl sitting. Those two images are really too similar. And I would probably eliminate the one where she is laying on the branch, which feels a tad awkward and forced to me. This is another strong point that Yōko has, which is even though it's fairly obvious that her subjects are posed, there is usually no feeling of it being forced or false. Even in the portraits earlier of the people in the textile center, there's a real feeling of naturalness in all the poses. As I mentioned earlier, this is a good example of profile portraits. There's a good mix of playful here with more studied images, and the only thing that I actually find missing are, as I said earlier, some contextual images. In this documentary series at the Vintage Festival, the message of where and why the photos were taken is not very clear in the first three photos. You see neither car nor the man particularly clear. The second three images, though, are a completely different story. You see the 50s architecture, the old car, and the dashboard baubles are clearly a part of a story on timeless vintage pieces. I'm guessing Yōko may have some more photos from this day to make this a viable entry on a website. In this group of portraits, Yōko writes that she was exploring in part the concept of solitariness, playing with minimal lighting and movement. While I feel that multiple exposures or similar effects can be a bit gimmicky, I understand how it could work conceptually. Again, there aren't enough images to build a page solely on this shoot, but I just love the photos of the garage, and they really make the idea of solitude stand out. Building on those types of images, the bleakness and the minimal available light could make this a tenable group of images. With these photographs, my first thought was of Irving Penn, especially seeing the third image. Just beautiful portraits of Alexander Geist, and the choice of sort of pigeonholing him, for lack of a better term, in this particular image is perfect. The posture, angle, lighting, the off-camera gaze, it all comes together to be one of the strongest images in the whole Instagram page. I'd say if Yōko doesn't have any more images from this shoot, that I would definitely consider putting these photos in a general portrait page. They are really, really strong, and they merit being included in a final website. This is the only series as a whole that I would consider not including. These are technically solid photos, no question about that. but that is about all they have going for them, really. There is no real style coming through, and they feel as if they were photos taken for an instructional manual or a lighting test. Now, we're going to be ending with a very good but short reportage on a climate change rally. These are great use of filling the frame with movement, concentrating on the signage. If Yōko could add some others and maybe a few details or interesting portraits, this would be a very worthy entry. Let's do a recap of the points we covered looking over Yōko's photos. Remember, the goal was geared to an eventual professional website or Behance page, and since I repeated it enough times, I imagine that you know the first suggestion is simply more photos. 9 photos would be the bare minimum for a series. The second suggestion is define your focus. Again, that's not to say limit yourself to what you photograph. It's to create the image of a professional and specialized photographer in the eyes of potential clients. Thirdly, within the website that will be used professionally, it's important to stay within the genre that is eventually used. As I mentioned before, I wouldn't put creative still life photos on a site dedicated to portraits, since it sort of muddies the waters a bit when someone, a client, is looking at the site for the very first time. And a final general sort of suggestion is to be sure and keep the interest in your subject high. When you're shooting, don't forget to shoot things and scenes related contextually, and when you're editing, be careful of repetitive images. Yōko has a great sense for portraits and documentary street type photography. She has, besides a great eye, the perfect traits for photographing people. She's curious, engaged, and reflective. She thinks about what she wants to say with her photos and how to go about saying that visually. I'm really looking forward to seeing new images and a dedicated website or Behance page. And as always, any questions and comments are welcome, and you can always find me in the Facebook Mastermind group. Have fun, guys, and see you in the next portfolio review.